On episode 285 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we bring back Dr. Bruce Fife to discuss his book, The Stevia Deception. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/285. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, and thank you so much for being a part of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. I'm so glad you're here today. Have a really interesting conversation with Dr. Bruce Fife. We had him on episode 281. We talked about a ketosis diet called Ketone Therapy was the name of that book. And today we're going to talk about the Stevia Deception, which is kind of interesting because I think a lot of us, when we're looking to get off of the sugar, like to go to these artificial sweeteners, these natural sweeteners in some cases, to actually get our sugar fix in without the calories. And, I think the book, The Stevia Deception, Dr. Fife does a really good job of explaining why that might not be as simple a solution as you might think it would be. So I really do encourage you to listen to today's episode because it really is an interesting conversation about these artificial and natural sweeteners. So Dr. Bruce Fife is a certified nutritionist and naturopathic physician. He is the author of more than 20 books, including The Coconut Oil Miracle, The New Arthritis Cure, and Stop Alzheimer's Now. He serves as the director of the Coconut Research Center in Colorado. So the guy does really understand nutrition. He really does love coconuts, believes they're a great health food for us. And a lot of his books do focus on using coconut and coconut oil as a way of staying and maintaining health. But I wanted to bring him back to talk about stevia because I think it's a very important topic for us. But I also do have to say, right before we get into the interview, this is going to be my last Thursday episode for a while. I had thrown in a few extra episodes for the review that we had that asked for a few more. But again, my life is a little bit hectic and I'm struggling to keep up with these extra episodes. But I'm doing them, and this will be the last one for a while. We'll go back to the weekly routine. I am planning something special around the end of the year. It won't be quite as in-depth as trying to do an entire episode, but stay tuned for that. If you'll subscribe on iTunes, you won't miss any of these. So I do hope that you're subscribing. You can go to 40plusfitness.com/review, and from there, that can take you to the iTunes page. You can review, rate, and then subscribe to the podcast. But with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Dr. Fife. So Dr. Fife, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad to have you back. When I first reached out to you, the book was, the Ketone Therapy, and that's episode 281. And I really, when I saw that, and then I saw other books that you had written, because you're quite prolific at that, I saw the book, The Stevia Deception, and I'm like, okay, well, I have to read that book, and just knew it would be a great topic, because I think a lot of people that want to get into ketosis think, okay, well, I see all these wonderful recipes that I can eat that are still sweet and still wonderful, because I don't want to do away with this or do away with that as they get into ketosis. And, stevia would be one of those things that you say, well, everybody believes stevia is a good thing, and we'll get into it in a minute, but there's some things that we need to know about stevia before we go down that path.
That's exactly right. And the purpose of the book was to give people the facts, both sides of the story, because what people hear about stevia is all the promotion and the beneficial effects that it's supposed to have. But stevia has a real dark side, too, that people need to know about before they start using it.
Yeah. Well, I want to start this off. I have a story. It's kind of a funny story. I took my daughter down to Argentina when she was 18. And we had a really good time down there. But, the people down there are kind of crazy about their yerba mate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, for those that don't know, it's kind of this tea-like drink that they put in these little, lack of a better, wooden cups, and they'll put the yerba mate, and most of them like it a little sweeter, so they'll actually put some stevia in there, the leaves, the actual stevia leaves, and they'll pour hot water in there, and it's very communal. It's very weird because they share their cups around. When you sit in the United States and you were sitting on a bus with some folks that you had just met, you wouldn't necessarily, if they handed you their drink with a straw, you wouldn't necessarily drink it. But they pass it around that way. So it's just very communal and very interesting. So I thought, okay, I'm here. I'll buy some of the yerba mate and I'll buy some of the stevia. And it was the actual leaves. So actual dried leaves of the yerba mate, and the same thing with the stevia. And I brought that home and realized pretty quickly that I'd bought way too much stevia. And it really didn't work as a sweetener for pretty much anything else except for the yerba mate. So I had this stuff up in my cabinet, in the spice rack area of my cabinet, and didn't think anything of it. And so I start dating this woman who's actually now my wife, and she gets up into my cabinet looking for spices, and she pulls out this little baggie, and she's like, "What the hell is this?" Now that's legal in Colorado now, but it was not legal where we were. And she's like, no, and I'm like, no, it's a sweetener. It's a sweetener. It's not what you think. And she smelled it and said, yeah, it's not what I thought it was, but what the heck is it? And so I kind of explained to her it was a sweetener that I really didn't find any other uses for. So eventually I threw it out, but. It was just kind of a funny story of my wife thinking, okay, was my girlfriend at the time, was like, who am I dating? What is this guy doing? And I'm finding this up in his spice cabinet. But no, it wasn't what it was. But stevia is basically a plant, which, for a lot of folks, they think, okay, well, it's a natural herb. It's a natural thing. But there are some safety concerns that we really need to be aware of when we're dealing with stevia. So what would you say were some of the safety concerns that we just need to be aware of as we're wanting to get into or maybe use stevia?
Well, yeah, you kind of mentioned something kind of interesting. It's an herb, it's a plant, and so people kind of automatically just assume, oh, it's natural, it's healthy, it's good. But that's not necessarily the case, because there's lots of natural herbs or plants that aren't healthy, that aren't good. You can name off poisonous ones, belladonna, and things like that, or even tobacco or cocaine. So there's lots of herbs that aren't necessarily healthy. And with stevia, it has some concerns with it. One of them is what it might do to reproductive health. And this is actually one of the traditional uses for stevia, is as a contraceptive or to cause an abortion. And so this is of concern because there has been studies that actually back up this traditional use for stevia. So it can mess with your reproductive system, both males and females. And this is backed by science. Another concern is that when you start eating stevia, it will trigger the sweet taste on your tongue, which sends signals to your brain, which then sends signals to your digestive tract to release insulin. And insulin will go into the digestive tract to pull sugar out of the blood and put it in the cells. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but stevia is promoted to diabetics, type 2 diabetics, to help them control their blood sugars. And the problem is that with a diabetic, their insulin levels are always elevated. And one of their problems is over several years, their pancreas is pumping out lots and lots of insulin. And over time, the pancreas just wears out and gives out. And so a type 2 diabetic can become insulin dependent because they're not producing any insulin anymore. Well, stevia will promote the pancreas to start pumping out insulin. And so it's going to, for a type 2 diabetic, it's going to wear out the pancreas quicker. So for type 2 diabetics, there's a little warning right there. Another problem is that stevia seems to put a great deal of stress on the liver. Studies have shown that consumption of stevia will produce an enzyme called ALT. And when ALT increases, it's an indication of liver disease or some type of liver stress. And so there's a sign that something's happening with the liver. Another indication with stevia is that some studies have shown that it's mutagenic. In other words, it causes mutations of the DNA. In fact, some of the benefits associated with stevia is its ability to kill some types of bacteria. Well, the method in which it kills it is by messing with the DNA of the bacteria. Now, this is of concern because it not only messes with the DNA of bacteria, but it also can mess with your DNA too. Your DNA cell, the cell's DNA can be messed up with stevia. And one of the things about the bacteria is that when you consume stevia and it's messing with the bacteria, it's messing with the bacteria in your digestive tract as well. One of the types of bacteria it actually affects is lactobacillus, which is one of the premier digestive bacteria that's used in dietary supplements to promote healthy gut health, and it messes with the DNA of this bacteria. So it's going to be changing your gut microbiome, and it's not changing it in a healthy manner. Another problem with stevia, and this is all backed by published studies. I'm not making this stuff up. But another problem is it's very hard on the kidneys. And so kidney health is of concern too. Again, they make tests after consuming stevia, and they can tell that it's very stressful on the kidneys. Now, lots of people like to say, well, stevia is an herb, it's totally harmless, it's completely safe to use, but that's not true. It's not totally harmless. For example, there was a study done in Japan in which they gave a group of animals, hamsters, rats, and mice, a single large dose of stevia. And then they monitored the animals for 2 weeks after a single dose. And in that time, most of the animals died. All the hamsters died, but many of the rats and the mice also died from this single dose. And the primary cause of death was kidney failure. So stevia isn't, like water that's really safe. There is a component to it. It can cause death at large amounts. Another problem that has surfaced in the literature is the possible effects on thyroid function. Some evidence shows that it can depress thyroid function. People use stevia for weight loss and to help with weight loss, and they often have problems with a sluggish thyroid. Well, if stevia is going to slow down the thyroid more, you're kind of defeating yourself. And so basically these are some of the major safety concerns with using stevia.
Yeah. Now, so obviously the stevia I brought back, I said, like, it was in dried leaf form. And I knew the source because I was there. I was in Argentina and it was there. I used it in the yerba mate. I didn't really find other uses for it, so it wasn't something that became a staple. It was just that occasional thing until I used up my supply of yerba mate, and then at that point I really didn't have any use for it. But there's some things. I mean, when I went to the store and they actually started like wholesale selling this stuff as a natural sweetener, it came out and it was white, and I'm like, well, okay. It's not white. It's a leaf, and so there's some things that we should know about stevia that we probably don't know, because we think, most people here would think stevia is this white powder and it's from a natural plant, but there's a lot going on that we might not be aware of.
Exactly. When people think of stevia, they just automatically think of a healthy leaf, a plant, an herb. But the stevia that you actually buy in the store, as you mentioned, is a white crystalline powder. And people assume, oh, it's just an extract like a tea, you boil it in water, and well, that's not true. Stevia is a very highly refined chemical. There are certain chemicals in the stevia leaf called stevioglycosides, and those are what gives stevia its sweetness. And what manufacturers do is they refine the stevia so that you've got basically pure stevioglycosides. So it's basically a powdered chemical. That white powder is a chemical just like any other refined chemical, just like, say, cocaine from the coca leaf. It's refined to the point that it becomes a drug, and the same thing happens with stevia.
Okay. And so, and what I understand also from the book is sometimes we buy something that actually tells us it's stevia, but it's not actually the stevia.
Yeah, if you go to the store and you look at any type of stevia that's being sold and look in the back and look at the ingredients, you'll be surprised is that there's a whole bunch of things in there. It's not like pure stevia. It's going to be mixed with other artificial sweeteners. It could be mixed with sugar alcohols, dextrose, maltodextrin, corn syrup, solids, natural flavorings. An assortment of ingredients are used along with the stevia. So it's never a pure stevia. It's always mixed with other things. And some of these other things we don't want, like aspartame or sucralose, or even dextrose and maltodextrin, which are other forms of sugar. And if you're trying to avoid sugar, well, some of these stevia products contain sugar.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that they do this, and it's kind of what I found, is when I say there wasn't a whole lot of other uses for it, is it actually kind of has a slightly bitter taste. So you have to mask that bitter taste. The yerba mate does that just fine because it's got that whole, texture to it, the whole thing going on. It actually works very well. But I tried it in other things, and it really didn't work for me.
A lot of people don't like stevia because of the bitter aftertaste. And if you use too much, that aftertaste becomes really strong. And lots of times people will say, oh, use such and such a brand of stevia because it doesn't have the bitter aftertaste. Well, I have to tell you that all stevia, real stevia, has the bitter aftertaste. It's just a part of the stevioglycosides. You cannot remove that aftertaste. But what a lot of manufacturers do is they dilute it with different sweeteners. So they'll add aspartame or erythritol or some other sweetener to cut the aftertaste so it's more palatable.
Yeah. Now, this was what surprised me because, a lot of times, like I said, someone wants to try the low-carb diet. They want to get into ketosis, but they want their cake too.
Uh-huh.
And so as they're looking for this, they're looking for that kind of that silver bullet that's going to allow them to continue to have their cake and have it sweet. And so, but unfortunately, stevia has the capacity to knock you out of ketosis.
Yeah, that was one of the key things that actually brought my awareness to stevia. Because I used to use stevia. I developed a lot of recipes using stevia, and we used it in our family. But I noticed that as we were into ketosis, going into ketosis, that if we used stevia, it would either prevent us from getting into ketosis or would kick us out, or it would make the amount of ketosis that we're in very low levels. And if we stopped using stevia, then the ketosis levels jumped up to where they should be. And so when I kept seeing this, I thought, it was one of the things that motivated me to start researching stevia, to find out about it and find out why it did this. And so in my research, this is one of the things that I wanted to find. And I did find studies that explain this. And basically what happens is that when you consume stevia, it actually causes your liver to produce glycogen, or in other words, to produce glucose and store it. Now, let me give you an example. There was a study in which the researchers used rats, and they put them on a 24 to 48 hour fast. And in that time, the rats went into a state of ketosis, and they were consuming nothing but water. Well, they gave them some water that contained stevia, and when they consumed the stevia, their bodies started producing glycogen. Now, keep in mind that when the liver produces glycogen, it cannot produce ketones. It can only produce ketones or glycogen. It can't do both of these because they're diametrically opposed to each other. And so the rats were kicked out of ketosis because the liver stopped producing ketones so it could produce glucose, or basically glycogen. Yeah. Now, an interesting thing about this is that these animals were not consuming any food at all. They were not consuming any type of plant or carbohydrate, and they weren't even consuming any protein, and yet their bodies were producing this glucose. So where did this glucose come from? Well, it came from muscle tissue. So the stevia triggered the body to take muscle tissue and break it down to produce this glucose it could store. And so this should be a warning sign to people, that if they're on a low carb or a ketogenic diet and they're consuming stevia, they're tearing down their muscle tissue to produce this glucose. And this is also very important for any type of athlete or someone who's very physically active.
Or anyone over the age of 35 that's already dealing with sarcopenia.
Well, yeah, exactly. They're going to start tearing down their muscle tissue to produce glucose by consuming stevia.
Yeah. Now, one of the things is, most of the time when folks are looking to these sweeteners, they're looking to them early in this process because they want that bridge fuel. They want that thing that'll get them to get into ketosis and get to that point. Once you're kind of fat adapted and you basically have the flexibility where you can go in and out of ketosis fairly easily, I'm not sure that would work exactly the same way, but it is one of those things to just consider is that, and the things we've talked about so far is that, okay, one, if you've got issues with your liver, your kidney, you're of childbearing age, or you have type 2 diabetes, this is something for you to really be considering because this could adversely affect your health. And then the other side of it is if you are someone that's interested in trying to get into ketosis, trying to burn body fat, this may turn that whole formula on its head, and you're not going to get the results that you're expecting on the fact that you're not eating any calories as you eat this product.
Exactly. That's what I found when people are using stevia to try to help them lose weight. They have a harder time losing weight. They have intense sweet cravings, and their body just isn't releasing the fat. Yet, if they can get off the stevia, they'll have a lot easier time of it.
And it's one of the things I've told people before. I'm like, it is tough at that beginning when you're really trying to get over your sugar addiction. But I can tell you right now, I remember when I was a kid, I used to have to take and pour sugar over strawberries. And I used to just sit there and get strawberries and put the sweet whipped cream on it or pour some sugar on it. Blackberries, same thing. I would put sugar on blackberries to basically sweeten them up. But I can tell you today, if I put a blackberry in my mouth, it's almost too sweet. It's like it's perfect, but it's like it's just I don't need a dessert when I sit down for dinner. If I see a dessert and they happen to put a couple little raspberries on the side of a chocolate cake or something, or blackberries or whatnot, I'll just sit there and eat those 2 or 3 berries. And it's wonderful. They're delicious. I can sit there and savor the flavor of the fruit, the berry, and it's as sweet as I need anything to ever be.
One of the things that I really notice when I go keto is the flavor of foods and sweetness. Foods become much more sweeter. So berries, which people, think maybe aren't mildly sweet, they become deliciously sweet. And just regular foods, the flavors become more intense and more delicious.
Yeah. Now, one last thing, because we can't leave without asking this question is, are any of these sweeteners safe at all? I mean, are they all going to do something unintended or knock us out of ketosis or have some health consequences?
Well, the problem with all these sweeteners is they share many of the same adverse consequences. And yes, basically all of these sugar substitutes, the aspartames and stevias, will kick you out of ketosis or lower your ability to get into ketosis. And so you need to avoid them. Stevia and other artificial sweeteners, they're used primarily to sweeten foods like cupcakes and cookies and candy bars and syrups for pancakes. In other words, they're used to sweeten junk foods. And simply because you remove sugar from it and you replace it with an artificial sweetener doesn't transform a junk food into a health food. In fact, artificial sweeteners are even worse than sugar. And so these junk foods become even junkier. And you can never be successful in losing weight and keeping that weight off permanently if you eat junk foods. And as you mentioned, people like to eat the same types of foods that they love and enjoy when they go on these diets. And using these sweeteners allows them to do that, except it's these foods that cause them to be obese, to be fat, to have diabetes, and have all these health problems. We need to learn not to eat these problem foods and learn to eat good, healthy, wholesome foods. Now, some people will ask, well, can I have any type of sweetener? Well, the best sweetener that you can eat is actually sugar, because the body knows how to handle sugar. Every cell in your body knows how to metabolize sugar. It's not the same with any of these artificial sweeteners. It's not the same with stevia. Your cells don't know what to do with stevia or aspartame, but it does know how to handle sugar. Our problem with sugar is it's everywhere, and we eat far too much, and it causes a lot of health problems.
Now, when you're talking sugar, you're not talking the refined white sugar stuff. You're talking the sugars that come in fruits, the sugars that So I think a lot of people would use like monk fruit as an example of a sweetener that's based on a fruit that's just, it's not that processed. So it's not so wholly processed that it's just completely devoid.
Well, basically, I'm talking about sugar in general. I'm not recommending that people eat sugar, and of course sugar and fruits and stuff are much better because they come with all the vitamins and fiber and stuff that make them not as bad. But what I'm suggesting is that if you have to have some type of sweetening in your life, that it should be a natural sweetener such as maple syrup or a maple sugar or a coconut sugar. And it should be limited. The agricultural department recommends that we shouldn't eat more than 8 teaspoons of sugar a day. Normally, on average, we consume about 44 teaspoons of sugar. That's way too much. But 8 teaspoons is something that's manageable for an average person who's not on a ketogenic diet but just wants to have a healthy diet. There's about 9 to 10 teaspoons in a can of soda. And so it's less than how much sugar, and that's for the entire day. And that's added sugars. That's not the sugar that's in fruits, but that's what you add on food. That's what's added into candy bars and in syrups and all this type of stuff.
And everything. I mean, you
everything,
the low-fat yogurt, all the things that
beans,
you would say. Yeah. You buy the can and you actually turn the label over and you look, and it's like, okay, there's the carbs in there, which is it's beans. Okay, so I get that it would have carbs. And then you look at the sugars, and it's like, holy crap, this is syrup in a can.
Exactly. And so, you actually find that 8 teaspoons, you find it hidden in your foods, really. And so, if you can limit it to that, you're doing okay.
And I think, again, I just want to get to the, give your taste buds an opportunity to adjust to what actual real food tastes like. By eating whole foods and kind of getting off the sugar, it's hard. I went through it myself, and the funny thing is I was thin when I moved to diet beverages. I was a very thin, lean, strong person, and I wanted to keep cutting my body fat because I was down to single digit body fat, and I was like, okay, well, I'll move over to these diet beverages because I don't need the extra calories from the sugar. And I actually became obese while I was drinking diet beverages.
And you're not the only one. In fact, that's exactly what research shows, is that people, regardless of their initial weight, whether they're skinny or medium or overweight, if they use diet beverages, their risk of becoming obese is greatly increased over those who drink the regular type.
Yeah, and so the sad part of this is, maybe a little bit of stevia is not a problem for you. Maybe you can cope with it. There are people that can cope with a lot of things that I can't cope with. But there is an underside. There is a dark side to this. And just knowing what you're consuming and getting the facts. And that's why I would say get this book. It's called The Stevia Deception. Dr. Fife has put a lot of research and thought into this book. And I think it's worth a read so you kind of understand what you're getting into. Yes, it's grown, but what you're buying in the store isn't necessarily what you would grow, and it has some downsides, even if it's just the plant, as many other plants do. So again, Dr. Fife, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness again. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, learn more about this book, where would you like for me to send them?
They can send them to the publishing website, which is www.piccadillybooks.com.
Okay. And this is going to be episode 285. So you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/285, and I'll be sure to have a link there along with the full show notes for this episode. So again, Doctor, thank you so much for being on 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you for having me on your podcast.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, would you please take just a moment to go out to iTunes and leave us a rating review? You can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/review, and that'll take you directly to the iTunes page. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Miriam Calamain and discuss her book, Keto for Cancer. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.